available at the Pennsylvania COC website as well as DCED's website in the library. Next slide, please. Okay, so earlier this year, the CARES Act was released, and in the CARES Act, there was almost $4 billion made available for the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. And in the Act, it stated that funds could be used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus among individuals and families who are homeless or receiving homeless assistance, and to support additional homeless assistance and homeless prevention activities to mitigate the impacts created by COVID-19. So we knew that the funds could be used to prevent, prepare for, and respond, but we really didn't have a clear definition of, well, what did that mean, right? And so when the ESG-CV notice came out, or as I mentioned earlier, on September 1st, the notice titled CPD 20-08 was released, and we were finally provided with the definitions of what it means to prevent, prepare for, and respond. Next slide, please. So the definition of preventing coronavirus, it's an activity designed to prevent the initial or further spread of the virus to people experiencing homelessness, people at risk of homelessness, recipient or subrecipient staff, or other shelter or housing residents. Some examples would be providing PPE to staff and participants, paying for non-congregate shelter, such as hotel-motel vouchers, paying for hand washing stations or portable toilets, or providing rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention to those at risk of homelessness. Next slide. So preparing for coronavirus, that's defined as an activity carried out by a recipient or subrecipient prior to or during a coronavirus outbreak in their jurisdiction to plan to keep people healthy and reduce the risk of exposure to coronavirus and avoid or slow the spread of the disease. And some examples provided were updating your written standards to prioritize those at risk of contracting coronavirus, adapting coordinated entry policies and procedures to account for social distancing measures or increased demand, developing a landlord recruitment strategy, training providers on infectious disease prevention and mitigation, and implementing a non-congregate shelter strategy. And lastly, responding to coronavirus is defined as an activity carried out once coronavirus has spread to people experiencing homelessness, provider staff, or once individuals and families lose or at risk of losing their housing as a result of the economic downturn caused by coronavirus. And here are some examples: transporting participants to medical appointments, paying for shelter to isolate individuals who have contracted coronavirus from other participants, providing rental assistance to those at risk of losing housing, have already become homeless or continue to experience homelessness due to the economic downturn caused by the coronavirus, and providing hazard pay to staff. So as I mentioned, almost $4 billion was made available through the CARES Act, or it's more like $3.96 billion. And DCED received a total of $39.8 million in ESG CARES Act funding, or what we call ESG-CV funds. The first $19 million was allocated in July of this year, and the second tranche of $19 million will be allocated in the coming months, and that will be ESG-CV 2 or round 2. One important thing I wanted to note that was in the ESG-CV notice that came out earlier this year is that HUD has instituted some pretty strict expenditure deadlines for the ESG-CV funds. This applies to both CV1 and CV2 funds. So what is stated in the notice is that 20% of the funds must be expended by September 30th of 2021. And 80% of the funds must be expended by March 31st, 2022. So there you can see the amount. So they total, 39 or so million that DCED received. These are our expenditure guidelines that we need to adhere to. And so just a note that for ESG-CV1 contracts that have been executed, the contract dates are July 8th, 2020 through January 8th, 2022. And pre-award costs are permitted and prior to that July 8th date, and Brendan will talk about that a little further in the slides here coming up. All right, so HUD created this nice little pretty and colorful chart that's here you can see the top describes the waivers, flexibilities, and limitations regarding ESG-CV. And the bottom addresses the regular annual ESG funds. And basically, the top for ESG-CV and ESG-CV2, the waivers and flexibilities apply depending on when DCED submitted our substantial amendment. So let's move to the next slide. I'll explain that a little further. So DCED submitted our substantial amendment for ESG-CV1 before September 1st. That falls under the yellow wedge in the chart that we just had up. So that means that the waivers and flexibilities are applicable. However, the limitations are not. For ESG-CV2, the substantial amendment will be submitted after September 1st. So that means the waivers, flexibilities, and limitations are all applicable. And so Brendan's going to describe the limitations here in the next couple of slides. So just, in summary, the limitations apply to ESG-CV2, but not ESG-CV1. And I also wanted to make note, I apologize, I should have made note earlier. Any of the waivers or flexibilities that we're talking about throughout this webinar only apply to ESG. We know that there were some COC waivers that were issued earlier this year and that are about to expire. We have word from HUD that there will be additional information on those COC waivers coming out sometime this week, so look out for those. But I just wanted to make note of that. Just keep in mind, these only relates to ESG. So Brendan, I'll turn it over to you.
Angela, and good morning, everyone. So I'm going to cover some of the limitations that were just noted applied to CV2, as well as some of the waivers. So some of the limitations that I'm going to start off with related to short-term and medium-term rental assistance. Short-term is considered up to 3 months, and medium-term is more than 3 months, but no more than 12 months. So that's a little different than how the typical ESG allocation would be. Medium-term could go up to 24 months typically. Emergency shelter can only be provided through January 31st, 2020, which is both applicable to the any emergency shelter operations, essential services, as well as the new and unique activity for temporary emergency shelter, which we will talk about that new and unique category a little bit later in the presentation. But all of those funds that are allocated to those two activities have to be completed by January 31st, 2022. So some of the waivers and alternative requirements that were mentioned, some of this is new, some of it is not, but there is no cap for emergency shelter and street outreach activities. Typically, no more than, I believe it's 60% could be allocated, but that doesn't apply under these new waivers. The administrative costs have been bumped up to 10%, which is more than the typical ESG allocation. But DCED splits the admin costs between ourselves and the recipients of the award. And there is no match requirement for the ESG-CV funds. That was applicable to CV1, but it is also applicable to CV2. The fair market rent or FMR standards are waived. That's nothing new. That was still in ESG-CV1, but still applies to 2. They must meet the habitability standards, but you can go above your area's FMR rate to find housing. For participants who meet their 24 months of maximum assistance between the dates of January 21st, 2020 and March 1st, 2021, they are eligible for an additional 6 months of assistance if needed. So only if they hit those caps can you go beyond. It has to be between those two specific periods, though. Otherwise, they cannot go beyond the 24 months of additional assistance. Some additional waivers and alternative requirements: housing stability case management for rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention is waived. Typically, you have to meet a minimum of monthly. However, under the ESG-CV, you do not need to meet. We still encourage that you meet with your participants to make sure that they are on their path to getting housing sustainability, but it is not a requirement to meet monthly. And of course, we also encourage doing non-face-to-face meeting, either that's Zoom or telephone conference calls, but you aren't required to meet that monthly case management. And this should be nothing new either. Individuals and families experiencing homelessness are not required to receive treatment or perform any other prerequisite activity as a condition for receiving shelter, rental assistance, or any other ESG service. So the Housing First model, COC follows it anyways, but they are not required to participate in any sort of prerequisite services. Legal services are only limited to those services necessary to help participants obtain housing or keep them from losing housing wherever they currently reside. So if they're being evicted, you can pay for their legal services for that. If credit counseling is an issue, that might be another a way to keep them from losing their housing or get in housing, just as a couple examples. And this is what Angela was talking about earlier. So while the ESG-CV1 contracts start in July, we can go back and make reimbursements on or after January 27th of 2020. And that is a documented date that the PA Department of Health began to prepare for the coronavirus. So that's our back date that we can use. So if you did incur any expenses related to coronavirus or ESG-CV when assisting a program participant, you can backdate those costs to January 27th, 2020. You just need to have good documentation to show what services were provided, and work with myself and Stacy, and we'll be able to assist with getting those reimbursed. And that is all I have. There are a couple questions in chat. I don't know if we want to address that before passing on, or if you would like to wait to the end, Angela.
Yes, I can do that. And I did want to address the question that just came up. Your ER date does, or environmental review date does have to align with the date that you intend to start receiving reimbursement. So if you, for example, said that we started our ESG-CV1 on May 1st, then your ER form must be May 1st. So yes, those must align. And I did want to mention too that in the ESG-CV notice, you'll see that HUD has stated that pre-award costs can go back to January 21st of this year. However, DCED had to provide the documentation to show that when we as the Commonwealth started preparing for coronavirus, and that's how the January 27th date was established. So just if you notice that, 6-day discrepancy, that's the reason. So our date is January 27th. So the other thing that was a little bit different that was outlined in the ESG-CV notice is that in addition to DCED having the ability to award funds to units of local government and nonprofits that are serving multiple counties, which is what we usually do under normal annual ESG funds, under ESG-CV, DCED can consider awarding directly to public housing agencies as well as local redevelopment authorities. So that was something that was new in the notice. Next slide. And so in the notice, there are also many new and unique activities that are eligible. And so we'd like to take the time now to review those activities. Stacy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Angela. These new activities are in addition to our regular ESG activities that we normally use for ESG, regular ESG-CV. These are in addition to for ESG-CV2 only. So first we have our temporary emergency shelter, which is temporary shelter is defined as any structure or portion of a structure which is used for a limited period of time because of a crisis, such as a natural disaster, a public health emergency, to provide shelter for individuals and families displaced from their normal place of residence or a sheltered or unsheltered locations. Next slide, please, Brendan. Examples of these shelters include an overnight or daytime 24-hour shelter in which program participants are only provided a safe place to sleep, to rest, bathe, and eat. Also, a shelter where one or more services are made available on site, whether by a shelter staff or contractors or through a memorandum of understanding with another subrecipient or service provider. And also a shelter designated, shelter designed to facilitate the movement of homeless individuals and families into permanent housing with a fixed period of time of within 12 months, and employ or contracts with one or more case manager services providers to provide services. Next slide. Another unique activity is training, and this is different from training that you would typically use under the activity administration. So this one is used for training on infectious disease prevention, mitigation for staff working directly to prevent, prepare, or respond to coronavirus among persons who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. And the use of funding shall not be considered administrative for the cost of purposes of, as I said, of the 10% cap. So again, this is different from the regular training that you would typically ask for reimbursement under the admin line item. This is a new, unique activity training. So next slide, Brendan. Next one is hazard pay. This is for frontline workers for working directly to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronaviruses among persons who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Examples of this will be emergency shelter intake staff people, street outreach teams, emergency shelter maintenance staff, the emergency shelter security staff, staff providing essential services such as outpatient health or mental health, or housing navigators, staff in proximity to persons with coronavirus or working in locations with high likely of contracting coronavirus. So again, frontline, these are like the front line workers working directly with homeless. Next slide. This one is, I believe, just typically for our street outreach activity. This will fall under, it's for hand washing and portable bathrooms, hand washing stations. So this is for installing and maintaining hand washing stations and bathrooms, such as porta potties for indoor locations for people who experiencing the unsheltered. Landlord incentives. This is really a good one. This will help, get, some of you have some difficulty getting some landlords to rent to some of your clients, but this incentive will fund those that can be, these funds can be used for landlords incentives as reasonable and necessary to obtain housing for individuals and families experiencing homelessness and at risk of homelessness. Please understand, a recipient may not use CV2 funds to pay the landlord incentives in the amount that exceeds the 3 times the amount of monthly rent charged for the unit. So example, next slide, Brendan. I believe we have an example. Yeah, so the example of this, an eligible landlord incentive includes cost includes like signing bonuses equals up to 2 months of rent, security deposits that equal up to 3 months of rent, or paying the cost of repair damages incurred by the program participant not covered by the security deposit, or that are incurred while the program participant is still residing in the unit, and also paying the cost of extra cleaning or maintenance. Next slide. Another unique activity for volunteers, a volunteer incentive. These funds can be used for the cost of providing reasonable incentives to volunteers, examples of cash or gift cards. And these are for people who have been and are currently helping to provide necessary street outreach, emergency shelter, central services, and housing relocations and stabilization services during this corona outbreak. Expanded activities, this is for hotel motel costs, where when no appropriate shelter is available, hotel motel may be utilized for renting rooms, cleaning rooms, any damages to your rooms. So this is typically just when there's no other hotel or motel, no appropriate shelters utilized, then a hotel may be utilized for these things here, may be used for these 3 things here. Next slide, Brendan. And also expanded population is eligible to be served for hotel. The examples who can use this is the literally homeless, any clients who are enrolled in COC or ESG rapid rehousing, any who are enrolled in ESG homelessness homelessness prevention, and any who are residing in the permanent supportive housing. So those are new activities, unique activities that we have for CV2. Next slide. In invoicing, there's still, until further notice, all invoices for ESG-CV2 or ESG-CV and CV2 still should be sent to me via email to my attention. We are currently working on a new way to receive our these invoices, but until then, please submit all invoices to me via email. I know some of the grantees submit through other ways that, because they have trouble. I'm not sure why sometimes we don't receive everything. Some grantees can't submit it through email, or there are large invoices with several emails that they send for one invoice. But until then, we are working on trying to implement a new electronic invoicing process. And when that does happen, I'm sure we will have a webinar to go over that, and it will be much easier for both of us. So I appreciate your patience and understanding during receiving these invoices with all of them. So thank you.
All right, so we also have new reporting requirements for ESG-CV. And beginning in October 2020, we are going to have to be submitting quarterly reports. And the good news is that most of the responsibility for these reports falls on DCED as the recipient and also the HMIS leads. However, in order for this first report, there is some additional information that we will need from you. So we will be reaching out in the next week or in the next couple of days to ask you for some information on your expenditures through September 30th of 2020 for ESG-CV1 if you are a CV1 grantee. So look out for that email. What grantees and subrecipients have to know for the quarterly reporting is that it's going to be critical that client data is entered into HMIS in a timely manner. If we're having to report, we are reporting expenditures as well as the client data on a quarterly basis. So it's important that that data on clients is entered into HMIS timely. And if you use an HMIS system other than PA HMIS, or if you're a victim service provider that uses a comparable database, you'll receive an email quarterly from SAGE prompting you to upload your CSV files. So the victim service providers and also HMIS leads who of those implementations other than PA HMIS will receive an email when it's time to upload the CSV file for that quarter for your client data. So it will look a little bit different, feel a little bit different, but as I said, the good news is as grantees and subrecipients of ESG-CV, you don't have as much reporting responsibilities as you typically would. So next slide, please. So we do have a survey out, and I wanted to do a quick plug for our survey, recognizing that there are, several new and unique activities in the ESG-CV notice. We wanted to get an idea of the need for those new and unique activities in your community. So if you have the opportunity, please take our survey. We want to hear from you. We want to know, what of those activities you could utilize, as well as what's happening in your community. There's plenty of opportunity for narratives. So please check out and take our survey. Be very appreciative. And Brendan, are you able to put that in the chat for us? Thank you. So I wanted to go back to some questions here. All right, we have one from Heather here that says, since COVID started prior to the March 31st waivers with meeting in person with participants, how should we document no signatures prior to the waiver? So we understand that you probably, weren't meeting clients in person, probably starting, at the beginning of March, mid-March, and that you were probably having to get consent from clients over the phone. And that's fine. If you could just indicate any place that a client signature is needed, that you spoke to the client on the phone, the signature was not obtained, but that you did review the information and receive consent from the client verbally for any of the your client intake forms. Because again, we do understand, and we're hoping that I think that HUD will allow some grace here and some flexibility in knowing what was happening in those times, and that it was it was difficult, if not impossible, to meet with clients one-on-one. We have another one from Lauren that says, can you please provide guidance on how regular or annual ESG grantees can request to use their ESG to prepare for or respond to COVID? Brendan, can you go back, because I think to the slide with the little chart, the little colorful chart, I think that if we review this, it will be helpful for some of the other questions that I saw here in the chat. So for ESG-CV1, the waivers and flexibilities apply. So basically anything we talked about, with the exception of those two limitations. If you want to go to the next slide, I might have you toggle back and forth here a little bit, Brendan. So I'm sorry, the next one, the limitation. So the limitations do not apply to ESG-CV1. The waivers and flexibilities and the new and unique activities apply to CV1 and CV2. The only difference is the limitations, all right? So any of these limitations, let's go back to the limitations. This is a limitation. It applies to CV2, but not CV1. Next slide. And this one as well. Emergency shelter only under CV2 can be provided through January 31st of 2022. And it's important to note that that includes emergency shelter and temporary emergency shelter. So for those of you out there that are on the call that are thinking about applying for CV2 for emergency shelter, keep this in mind. The shelter can only be used through January 31st, 2022. So going back to the chart, Brendan. Annual ESG, for example, if you're a 2020 ESG grantee or a 2019 ESG grantee, if you're using your funds to prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, these waivers and flexibilities apply. Now, the limitations we talked about do not. There's 2 slides. Those limitations do not apply, but anything else that we talked about does apply. And the interesting thing is that HUD, when you talk, we've asked a lot about how would grantees document that? How are grantees supposed to document that they're using their regular annual funds to prepare for, and respond to coronavirus? And they're actually allowing pretty much flexibility here. You know, if you don't have to have something that says the person contracted COVID, or you don't have to have something that says, you know, their loss of income was directly related to COVID because a family member had COVID or something like that. If you're able to justify that, yes, you know, we were in the midst of COVID and we were using these funds, our annual ESG funds, for preventing or responding to coronavirus, it's acceptable. So there's pretty much leeway here, and I think we'll have more guidance coming out about you know, especially if you want to use these new and unique activities under your regular ESG, you know, how that's going to work, and if we're going to allow all of the activities as well. And so I'm hoping that answered some of the questions that were in the chat. If not, please let me know. And so Allison says, to clarify, hazard pay is only an option for CV2 and not 1. It does apply to both. But again, I think DCED will be coming out with further guidance on, you know, which activities specifically we will be allowing, and thus the survey. So please take our survey. We have a question. Hotel motel costs come out of the emergency shelter line item. That is correct. Hotel motel must come out of the emergency shelter. So if you have a need for hotel motel and are considering applying for CV2, it falls under the emergency shelter component. Question about landlord incentives. Is it 3 months incentive on top of first, last, and security deposit, which is typical to move families from shelter to housing? My understanding of this is that the incentive you provide cannot be more than 3 months of rent. And I understand what this question is saying is that it's, you know, it's typical that a landlord will ask for first, last, and security deposit. So I think I would like to get do a little more research on that question to see if, you know, if what's stated in the lease is they're asking for first, last, and security deposit, is it acceptable to go above that 3-month maximum to provide an incentive? So I can do a little more research on that and get back to you on that one. Okay, how do we track CV clients in shelter within the existing shelter and HMIS? The added funds were to expand services in the existing shelter to address CV, right? And so HUD is advising, or actually requiring, that we do not set up new projects for emergency shelters in HMIS for ESG-CV funds for emergency shelter. Those clients will be captured under your regular emergency shelter, ESG emergency shelter. And when we talk about the reporting and the setup of the reporting, that's something that we at DCED, as the recipient, there's this formula that we have to use pertaining to emergency shelter that will allow us to establish a start date for the CV once we start our reporting for emergency shelter, that will that they're hoping when we use that formula, it will capture most of the clients served under ESG-CV emergency shelter, but they're trying to prevent any over-reporting or duplication. So emergency shelter clients should continue to be entered into your ESG emergency shelter, into HMIS. There will not be a new project setup. Set up for, and we're finishing up that setup now. And that the next day, everything should be ready to go, and the new projects will be set up in HMIS to be able to report any clients that you serve through ESG-CV funds. Any clients served, just to reiterate, any clients served through emergency shelter or street outreach should continue to go into your regular, ESG HMIS project that you have set up. Okay, let's see here. Next question. Okay. Since DCED issued the RFP for ESG, just remember that the ESG CV1 has been issued and that money has been awarded. However, CV2 is coming. There is now the PHFA rent relief program and the CDC eviction moratorium for ESG HP subrecipients. If they have the capacity to do rapid rehousing or non-congregate sheltering in their communities, would DCED recommend they request a modification to their grant to be able to respond to the needs in their community and spend down their ESG funds if they're not spending down their HP as much as they had anticipated? Absolutely, yes. And that's that's something that HUD has been encouraging, and that we agree with, is that we want to allow you the flexibility to be able to move your funds around as needed. So if you applied for rapid rehousing and emergency shelter and homelessness prevention, but you're underspending in one or overspending in another, that we do encourage and want you to move your funds around as you see fit to best serve clients in your community. One change that came out recently, and Stacy, I'm hoping I can call on you quickly here to talk about revisions. We sent out an email a couple of weeks ago that was a change to how revisions can be requested, and that we no longer require that your chief elected official sign off on that revision. Do you mind talking about that a little bit more, Stacy? Unmute.
There we go. It was stuck for a minute. I'm sorry. Yes, for revisions, we are now no longer allowing for a simple revision. If you're moving funds within an activity, you no longer need to get your the elected official, your commissioner, to sign off on that request. That simply means if you're in rapid rehousing, and you want to move some funds around from financial assistance, rapid rehousing, to rental assistance, rapid rehousing, you just simply, you still have to put the request in to us for permission to do that, but you do not have to get a signature or approval, prior approval from your elected official. Still, for modifications and amendments, you still will have to do that. You still will have to get the elected official's signature, but for revisions, you no longer will have to, that's no longer required. That's a quick, simple fix that we can do within within our homeless team to allow that.
Thank you, Stacy. And so there's a question about where you find the HUD guidance on the waivers, flexibilities, and limitations. It is in the CPD notice, CPD 20-08. If you go to the link that we put in the chat for the survey, when the survey pops up, there should be a link to the notice. And so you can find all of, you can find the notice at that link if you click on the survey. Let's see if there's any other questions. Hazard pay, how does that work? Right, good question. So we, I think that HUD's, again, is allowing, you know, significant flexibility here. And I think that DCED, if that's something that we're going to allow as a new and unique activity, that we would provide and work on specific guidance on how that would look, whether it be, you know, $3 hourly increase to their, you know, or $3 increase to their hourly rate, or a one-time bonus or something like that. So that's something that we're still in the process of working out with the hazard pay. So I'm going to say to stay tuned for more information on that. And again, if you think, you know, if that's something that you really feel is a need in your community, I hate to keep plugging the survey, but please let us know in the survey. You know, we want to know, we want to hear from you as far as, you know, how would you make that work, you know? So please let us know. I'm seeing, I think that most of the questions were addressed. I'm hoping that, let's see here. Yes, so Kathy has a question. If we would like to use any of the new and unique activities out of CV1, do we need to do anything or notify or ask permission to DCED? We would definitely have to have conversation about that. And I think we're going to push pause in the new and unique activities for now, until, you know, we're able to work out, you know, what they'll look like and how they'll be offered and all of that. So once that comes out and you are interested in those new and unique activities, you would have to work with us as far as how they would be added to your, you know, current ESG, either regular annual or ESG-CV1. Right. So we talked about the limitation of rapid rehousing only being for 12 months, which is, you know, that's the maximum of 12 months, which is something new under ESG-CV2. The question is, if a client is getting rapid rehousing assistance in ESG-1, can they get another 12 months in ESG-2? No, sorry, that would not be allowable. Brendan, do you mind putting the last slide up if you could? I just want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to see. This is the homeless program team at DCED. I've included all of the contact information for the three of us that were on this webinar, as well as our HMIS team. I want to encourage you, please reach out if you didn't have an opportunity to ask your questions today, or if after you review the notice and have additional questions, please reach out to us and let us know. As you know, if it's program related, you can reach out to me, Stacy, or Brendan. Anything about HMIS, you can reach out to a member of the HMIS team. I understand that there, you know, with the new project setups and everything, there might be some questions. And again, when I mentioned that we're going to be reaching out to all the ESG-CV1 grantees in the next couple of days to ask for information around your expenditures, we are also going to be providing instructions on the HMIS setup and how that is going to operate for ESG-CV. So there will be additional instruction coming soon. I thank you all for attending the webinar today. And again, please feel free to reach out. We're here to help, and we look forward to working with all of you. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.